and start. All right, so let's learn Daf Zayin today, Amud Aleph, starting with Daf Vav Amud Beis at the bottom. So yesterday we learned that there is a mitzvah to search for the chametz, and that we already learned in our Mishnah. And then Rav told us that you also have to be mevatel that chametz at the time when you're searching for it. And the Gemara wants to know, why do you have to do it then? So the Gemara said one answer, and then the Gemara ended off with the second answer, which was that we're concerned that you might find something that you like, and for a moment you might think, "Oh, let me try that," and then you'll even though you catch yourself right after. Nevertheless, in the interim, you would have been in violation of Bayir Abba Yimatze.
It's called tashkis if I don't eat, right?
Right? Yeah, it's only mitzvah. Yeah, mitzvah, exactly. So the Gemara said that we can't do it. We can't just be mevatel it when you find it, because it's no longer in your reshus once the time comes. Meaning, Chazal took away, or the Torah took away the chametz from you at the time, and therefore you cannot be mevatel anymore. It's not within your jurisdiction. So therefore, we are concerned that you might find it after it's already time to get rid of it, and that will be the problem. So now the Gemara says, we're on the second to bottom line. Why don't you just do it in the fourth or fifth hour? Meaning, before you have a responsibility to get rid of it, just be mevatel it then, and then you don't have to worry about it. Be mevatel it. Why do you have to do it the night before? Why can't you do it in the morning? The Gemara says, "Kimin the lavasman isurahu, the lavasman biurahu, dilma pasha v'lemevatle." Since it's neither the time to search for it, nor is it's not the time to get rid of it, and it's not the time that you're not allowed to eat it because it's still the morning of Erev Pesach in which you're allowed to have your chametz. So then, why would a person even think to mevatel it? Because he's not involved in it right now. He's eating chametz, and there's really no issue. So therefore, we are concerned that he might forget because there's nothing reminding him, and he won't be mevatel it. So the Gemara asks him mevatel b'shis. So then, why don't we do it already once you're in the sixth hour? Meaning to say, the way Taisus understands it, we're talking about the beginning of the sixth hour, that it only becomes out of your reshus at the end of the sixth hour. But during the sixth hour, when you're involved in burning it, at that point, why don't we just establish the minhag that everybody should be mevatel then during the sixth hour? It's Rashi. That's what you said. We're going with Taisus over here. Taisus is saying that we should talk about the sixth. It leaves your reshus at the end of the sixth hour. So our Gemara is asking, why aren't you mevatel it during the sixth hour before that happens? Because obviously, once the time comes that it's out of your reshus, you can't be mevatel anymore. We've already established that. So we must be talking about before then. So during that sixth hour, while it's still in your reshus, but you're now involved in burning it because you're not allowed to eat it anymore. You're already into the sixth hour. So at that point, you should have a decree that now everyone's involved in their burning. They should also be mevatel, which, by the way, is exactly what we do, right? We say kol chamira when we burn the chametz. So why isn't that sufficient? The Gemara says, no, kimin the isura d'rabbanan ilvei, since there is a rabbinic prohibition against eating it already during the sixth hour, keda'iraisa damya, it is treated like the biblical prohibition, which is it's no longer considered to be in your jurisdiction, and therefore you cannot be mevatel anymore. So once the sixth hour comes, at that point it's already considered to be out of your possession, even though that's only rabbinic. Nevertheless, it's enough to say that you cannot be mevatel. As Reb Gidel said in the name of Reb Bar Yosef, in the name of Rav, someone who wants to marry a woman, so in order to marry her, you have to give her something as kiddushin. And if he decided to give her some chametz after the sixth hour, and on Erev Pesach, great time to go and get engaged. So if he gives her this chametz already beyond the sixth hour of the day on Erev Pesach, afilu bechiti kordanisa, even with wheat from Cordon, maybe related to Gordon, which is very difficult to become chametz, but it still can become chametz. Ein chayshishin lekadushin. We don't even consider that this was a valid kedushin. Why? Because it's no longer in your possession. It doesn't count. It's not in your reshus. So we see here clearly that even once you're in the sixth hour it is not considered yours at all, and therefore you would be too late to be mevatel. Now the Gemara asks, is it true that once it becomes prohibited, you can no longer be mevatel? But then we learn in a brayso, or someone was sitting in the base medrash. And he remembers that he's got chametz in his house, but he's in the base medrash. Mevatel b'liboy. He just does bittul in his heart, meaning he thinks in his mind, this chametz that I have in my house is batel. And this is true echad Shabbat or echad yantiv, whether it is Shabbat or yantiv. So now the Gemara analyzes. I can understand how we can have a case where it's Shabbos that the person remembers and he can be mevatel. How is that? If Erev Pesach falls on Shabbos, that makes sense. Ela yantiv, but how the Brisa says that it's true for Shabbos and yantiv, meaning even if it's on yantiv, you still mevatel it in your head. How could you do that? Basar Yisuruhu. It's already the time of Isser, and we already said once it's the time of Isser, you can't eat it. It's out of your rishus, and you can no longer be mevatel. So what's going on over here? Amar Racha Bar Yaakov says, here we're talking about a student who's sitting before his Rebbe. He's in the shir, he's listening, and he can't just get up and leave. He remembers that he's got a dough which is needed. It's not chametz yet, but it's a kneaded dough that's sitting in his house. And he's concerned it might become chametz. So what should he do? If he's concerned it's going to become chametz if he leaves it and doesn't bake it, but he also can't get up and go because he's in the middle of the shir. He can't just get up and leave in the middle of the shir. So therefore, so he should just initially have in mind he's being mevatel in his mind, and this way he doesn't have to worry about it. So it might become chametz, but he's already mevatel, and this is done even on yantiv. Dekanami, and this is inferred as well. Diktani, from that which it says, it says he was sitting in the base medrash. Why is it saying he's sitting in the base medrash? Just say he's not home. Why are we specifying the base medrash? Because it must be that he can't get up and leave and deal with it personally. So instead, he can rely on the bittul shema mina, and we can in fact infer that from Amar Rabba Bar Rav Huna Amar Rav. Rabba Rav Huna says the name of Rav. Hapas she'ifsha. If you have bread that became moldy, so the bread in those days, in the times of the Gemara, bread and matzah were very similar. The matzah that they use is not like our matzah. Our matzah is very thin and crisp, depending on how stale it is, but it's certainly very thin, and it would never be confused with any kind of bread. However, back then, the matzah that was used is like some Sfardim still do today. It was more like a lafa. It was thicker. It would rise a bit. And that is, as long as it's within the 18 minutes, is not chametz, and it's totally fine, even though we don't do that today. But that was at the time. So back then, a lot of their bread was made also very similar to matzah. So if you just found a crumb, you wouldn't necessarily know where it came from. And even if you found a small piece, you wouldn't necessarily know where it came from. Did it come from a chametz dough, or did it come from a matzah dough? So if a person has bread that became moldy, kivin sherav matzah mutaris. Since if there's more matzah, then it is permitted. Meaning, if a person has his bread box and he sees some moldy bread on the bottom of the bread box, and he doesn't know, is this moldy matzah or is it moldy bread, moldy chametz? So if there's more matzah, then it's permitted. Meaning, he doesn't have to be concerned that it is chametz. So the Gemara wants to know what's going on up here. Hey chidami, what's this case? If you know that this piece of spoiled bread is actual chametz bread, so then ki rabsa matzah might have it. Who cares if there's more matzah there? If you know it's bread, it's chametz. There's nothing to do about it. There's no such thing as saying since there's more matzah, therefore the bread becomes matzah. That doesn't work. Rather, the case must be that you don't know. You don't know. You can't recognize this piece if it's chametz or matzah. So if that's the case, who cares that there's more matzah there? I feel like even if there's no more matzah than there is potentially chametz, nazel basar. We should go with the most recent item that was put into this box. So let's say we're in the middle of Pesach. So certainly you've put chametz, you haven't put chametz into this box in a couple of days already, but you've been putting matzah into this box every day. So the most recent thing that's in here has certainly been matzah. So therefore, I can assume that what you find in this box is what was most recently put in it, which is matzah. Didn't we learn in a Mishnah? Money that is found before the people who sell animals. And this is in Yerushalayim, around the Beis Hamikdash area. People were selling animals for the use of karbanos. So if someone finds money on the floor over there, la'olam meiser. You can assume that money is meiser because the person needed to take off meiser sheni, the second tithe, which was taken from your produce. Now, the produce wasn't going to last until you made it to Yerushalayim because you only went to Yerushalayim 3 times a year. And the produce was being brought into the house long before then. So it would sit for months. And obviously, it's not going to last for months. So what do you do with it? You redeem it onto money. So you take the value of all this Meiser Sheni produce and you transfer it onto the money. This money now becomes Meiser Sheni money. Then you take that money to Yerushalayim and you buy food with it there and you eat the food there. So now, if you find money laying around in Yerushalayim on the ground, if it's in front of the animal sale spot, I don't know what you would call that, the animal sale shop. So then store, I don't know, whatever. So you can assume it's Meiser because you can assume that somebody was buying animals with their Meiser because that's typically what you do. You'd buy karbanos and you'd eat part of the karban and the rest would go onto the mizbeach. So you can assume that was the case, and therefore any money that you find there needs to be assumed Meiser. Baharabayis, if you're on the Temple Mount, so which is a broader area, Chulin, you can assume it's actually not Meiser because if it's around there, it's too far away to have to assume that it was Meiser. But Yerushalayim, now if you're in Yerushalayim, so then it depends. B'shas haregel, if it's during the Yantif, if you're around Pesach, Shavuos, or Sukkot, where all of Klal Yisrael is coming together and everyone's using their Meiser Sheni money, then Meiser, you have to assume that this is Meiser Sheni money as well. But B'shari Meiser Shana, but during the rest of the year, Chulin, you can assume that it is unconsecrated money and you don't have to worry about it. Now, to that, V'amar Shmaya bar Zira said, my time, what is the reason for this? Why is it that you can assume it is not Meiser Sheni money in Yerushalayim? Since it was normal for them to clean the streets of Yerushalayim every day, or at least the markets every day. So Alma, it would seem, Amrinan Kamai Azalei. We assume that whatever was there before is gone because whatever was there was cleaned out. And these are new ones. So Hachanami, so too over here in our case with the bread box. Nema Kama Azal. We should say that the first things that you put in the box are gone. Because typically, before you put new bread into your box, you take out the old stuff, and so therefore, whatever is in the box now, you can assume is the most recently placed into the box item. So, since the most recently placed thing would have been matzah, you can assume that the stuff you find in there was matzah. Just like if you were in Yerushalayim, you can assume the most recent thing was not meiser if it's not during the time of the yontif. So the Gemara answers, no. Shani Hacha here is different. Because over here we're talking about a moldy piece of bread. Now, a moldy piece of bread means that it's not new. It couldn't have just fallen here today. It couldn't have just put it in there this morning, and now you're not sure, is it from today or is it from a week ago? This is moldy. It doesn't get moldy in 10 minutes. So the fact that it's moldy proves to us that it's old. So the Gemara asks, well, wait a minute. If you're going to tell me that the mold is what proves to us that it's old, so then why does it help if you have more matzah there? Because remember, we learned the halacha is that if there's more matzah than chametz, then you can assume that it's matzah. But if you're telling me that it's moldy, which means it certainly came from before Pesach, because it's that old, so then what does having more matzah help? So therefore, Amar Rabba says as follows: don't say that there is more matzah there. Just say that there are more days of matzah, meaning there are more days of Pesach. Meaning to say that we're talking about that it's towards the end of Pesach. So it's already been a bunch of days of Pesach. Let's say we're at the very end of Pesach. So now there would have been enough time for it to have gotten moldy, even though it was matzah. So now I can assume that if there's already been that many days of Pesach, that it's not from before then, because that's too far back. Because again, I go by the most recent thing, and even though it's moldy, since the most recent thing was matzah, and it's possible that the matzah molded already, because it's already been a couple of days, so that is sufficient.
If it's moldy, is that you assume it's
No, we're not going to assume it's not really chilek. It's because they actually used moldy bread in that.
They did?
Yes, they did. So Ihachi, the Gemara asks, if so, Pshita, this should seem to be obvious. If you're talking about where it's already far into Pesach, why would you even think that there would be bread in there a week later? The Gemara answers that we don't need it for anything other than the following case: the Ifusha Meruba, that there's a lot of mold on it. It's very moldy. So now, Mao, the time I might have thought to say, since there's a lot of mold, so that should prove that it's certainly chametz. Kamash Malan. So now this statement comes to teach us, since it's already been many days of Pesach, Amrina, we can say, Kol yem v'yem nahama chamima afa. Every day he baked new bread, meaning matzah, and he put it on top. Every day you'd add more, you'd bake and you'd add. No, people didn't keep bread from day to day. You'd just put fresh in every day. The avshatzvei. So since you're putting warm bread, warm matzah on top of this every day, that heat and the moisture and everything could have caused the mold to grow faster and more, and therefore we can assume that it is in fact matzah, even though it could have been bread. We can assume that it's matzah.
You wouldn't have had a clean out period before Pesach, the way that they would have known that the place you kept bread would.
If that was the case, then there'd be no question. You're right. Obviously, we're talking about where that was not the case. If he cleaned it out, he knew there was no chametz in there before, and then there's no question about it. It's 100% matzah, no doubt. Here we're talking about where you have a doubt, which means you didn't clean it before.
That sounds like the whole house. No,
I don't know. He took out this bread box. He forgot to clean. I mean, would you clean your bread box before Pesach? Really?
I'd get rid of it. So.
Oh, me, Ozlina, Basra. The Gemara asks, do you in fact go by the most recent thing, the last thing? V'atanya, but then I'm learning a brayser. Rabbi Yehuda says, if you have a box that was used for both regular money and meiser money, and then you found a coin somewhere, and you don't know in this box, you don't know if it's meiser money or if it's chulin money. So the halacha is imrayv chulin, imrayv meiser. If the majority of the money that was in there was chulin, then you stick with chulin. You assume it's chulin. If the majority was meiser, you assume it's meiser. But why? We should go by the most recent thing. What did you put in there most recently? Did you use it most recently for chulin, or did you use it most recently for meiser? And that should be the deciding factor. If we say we always go by the most recent thing, why wouldn't that be true here? Yitzchak says, here what are we dealing with? You were talking about a case where I used it for both chulin and meiser. See, same result. Chulin and meiser. If any idea and he doesn't know, if you don't know which one you used most recently. So if you don't know which one you used most recently, so now what you do is the majority. But obviously, if you did have a more recent one, you would follow the more recent. Razid gives another answer. You had it in piles, meaning you used both in the box. You had a pile of chulin in the box, and you had a pile of meiser in the box. And now you found one in between the piles, or you found one after you took everything out of the box, and you find one left in there. So now what do? You use it for both. There's no one that's more recent than the other.
Would you do that?
I wouldn't recommend it. Yeah.
Because
I also clean out my bread box before Pesach, okay?
Chulin and and meiser.
Yeah, but you had piles. You had this.
Yeah,
that's
piles don't always stay in piles.
Apparently not. So that's why we have a price. Otherwise, you wouldn't have it.
Okay.
Papa says, no one ever said we're dealing with this, the most diligent people. Papa said, that you found it in a crack, like there, this box isn't
Cracks
under the crack. So now you don't know where it came from. You don't know where it came from. You can't go by most recent, so therefore you go by majority instead. All right, very good. We will stop here.
And the reason these lights are not working is because they have full power, but they're burnt out. I mean,